hard to give the 5-minute elevator pitch about this in any forum without pointing you at, probably a dozen books.
Was it Watson or Crick who proposed an extraterrestrial origin for DNA because he couldn't understand how it could have possibly evolved?
And I tell my colleagues, don't tell me there's no evidence if you haven't spent at least a day looking into the evidence. Go look up where most of the UAPs are actually seen. They're seen around our nuclear aircraft carriers.
Are those areas more surveyed?
Perfect question.
I mean,
yes. Yes. So maybe it's a observer bias. But because they're more observed, I'm at about 89,000 citation. With credible camera systems.
How many patents do you have?
Somewhere between 50 and 60 at this point. And with credible observers, then it's more, then it's more credible. Here's an interesting thing that I hold the Rachford and Carlota A. Harris Endowed Professorship, a technique that I came up with called the 293 T-cell technique. Basal ganglia is part of that process, a central place for that process.
Is that an embodiment constraint, essentially?
Sorry, what do you mean by that? We've spun out at least half a dozen companies on that side of things alone. The size of this area of the brain correlated directly with intelligence.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And which part exactly? Was that the caudate?
That was the caudate.
How high was the correlation? Do you remember? What was the magnitude of the correlation?
I can't remember. I've raised the money to create a whole new kind of instrument that can measure things at the atomic level. But we have 3 papers.
Okay.
3 papers on it that we published. So it's interesting stuff.
When were they published?
In the last 3 or 4 years, people were worried about. And we even actually saw the first COVID lungs from, unfortunately, deceased patients. And that actually scared the bejesus out of me.
You have a multitude of abilities and a stellar track record that's continuing.
Looking into the evidence, if you want me to give you the books, I'll tell you which ones to start with.
You mentioned a couple of books. Do you want to just name a couple of them that people could delve into?
Well, I mean, I would read Jacques Vallée's Passport to Magonia, which will give you a very wide view of what's going on. Another is by Robert Powell, and it's basically, I can't remember the exact title, but the military, I'll have to give you the name. I'll just scramble it.
There's UFOs and Government,
yes.
A historical inquiry?
Yes, that's it.
UFOs and Government, a historical inquiry. Okay.
I hold the Rachford and Carlota A. Harris Endowed Professorship, and the major focus of my lab's research, frankly, over the last 30 years since I've been at Stanford, has been on the immune system and creating technologies that allow us to collect more and more data about the immune cells and or cancer cells that we're interested in. And so that's led me from the development of retroviral techniques for gene delivery and gene therapy. So all the retroviruses and lentiviruses that are used in the world today for gene therapy were developed based on a technique that I came up with called the 293 T-cell technique. We've created and spun out, probably at least half a dozen companies on that side of things alone. Lately, we've been moving into artificial intelligence. We've started and spun out 2 companies there. And now I'm actually moving into atomic imaging because I sort of feel like that's the next level down of information that I need to get at to understand gene function. So I've raised the money to create a whole new kind of instrument that can measure things at the atomic level.
Okay, so how many patents do you have?
I think somewhere between 50 and 60 at this point.
And research articles?
Over 350.
Right. Okay. Well, so for everybody watching and listening, I mean, obviously that's a tremendous number of patents because actually 1 patent is a lot of patents. You can do a rule of thumb calculation. 3 research papers properly packaged make a pretty nice PhD thesis. So 300 is roughly equivalent to 100 PhDs. And that's a lot of PhDs. And I think that's a reasonable way of looking at it, not least because most PhDs end up with either 0 or 1 publications.
At this point, I think I'm at about 89,000 something citations. So that puts you in the top whatever per. Yeah. So all those ideas that you just talked about, where it actually finally comes to, is this practical or not? The basal ganglia is part of that process, a central place for that process.
Is that an embodiment constraint, essentially?
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, some things you can act out, and some
I see.
things
Yes,
you can't.
Yeah, but it also appears to be used in the abstract sense now. Like, is this the right move to make in a chess game, which is is kind of a abstract reasoning. And we actually did we did a study on it. I mean, believe it or not, we came to this area of the brain because of some of my UAPs that the size of this area of the brain correlated directly with intelligence. And so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And which part exactly? Was that the caudate?
That was the caudate. Yeah, but we were more.
How high was the correlation? Do you remember? What was the magnitude of the correlation?
I can't remember. But we have 3 papers.
Okay.
3 papers on it that we published. So it's interesting stuff.
When were they published?
In the last 3 or 4 years.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I haven't come across those. I'm very interested in the neurological determinants of intelligence.
But there was a guy in literally, I think, the year 2000 from Harvard who, through his own sort of best guesses or whatever, who had proposed, before anybody actually found it, that, I think his name was Hoffman, he's now at UCLA, he's a professor of neurology there, had proposed that the caudate and the basal ganglia were going to be involved in intuition. I didn't read his whole paper on it, but it was already a postulate when he was like a postdoc.
I wonder what do you think the connection is? I mean, when you think of intuition, you tend to think, at least I tend to think of pattern recognition, let's say. What do you suppose the connection is between pattern recognition and the caudate and its relationship to motoric movement?
It's making a decision with sparse data. It's the instantaneous decision to leap when there's movement, like the leopard's about to jump out of the tree at you, and it's the movement. But in the military,
right? So that's having to. I'm imagining someone on a playing field, in a hockey game or a soccer field. Obviously, they're tracking many moving objects simultaneously and abstracting out something like a meaningful pattern, right? Which direction is this going? And then they're modulating their reactions in consequence of reading the field. And the great athletes, the great team athletes are particularly good at that. Wayne Gretzky was particularly good at that in hockey. So the pattern recognition would be something like, you can imagine that being also crucial in a hunt, right? Because you're going to want to know where the animal is going to go. And with your pack, you have to orchestrate your movements, and you have to do that together. There's something almost musical about that, like lions can do that and pack animals. And so the intuition in that regard is a very complex form of reflex in a sense.
Yes, exactly. So humans seem to have evolved a way to use a pre-existing system in the basal ganglia that was really just there for motor movement and making subconscious decisions. And they've layered over it, and they've put an abstraction layer on top of that so that we can now use it for mathematical principles and other ideas. It is what provides that aha moment. And I've learned actually to see when the aha moment comes is almost like a form of color. It's like when the next time you get an aha moment, people were worried about, and we even actually saw the first COVID lungs from, unfortunately, deceased patients. And that's that actually scared the bejesus out of me.
Multitude of abilities and a stellar track record that's continuing. And so that sets the foundation for our next discussion. You started to become interested, and I would like to know the story, in unidentified aerial phenomena. And that's definitely a lateral move from your other interests. And so I'm very curious about all of that.
So, I mean, there's a couple of origin stories to it, but I think the easiest to start with is with the Atacama mummy, right? The small mummy that people had been promoting as being an alien, right? The mummy that was found in Atacama, Chile. And
right, that was a couple of years ago, not too long ago.
Oh, actually, it was 12 years. It was.
Was it 12 years ago?
Yeah, actually, already.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It was a long of the body, a rib. I wanted the rib because I wanted the bone marrow from within the rib because I felt that would be the place best protected from bacterial contamination. And the long and the short of it was that we showed that it was a human baby. Have you? But in the 3 years.
Okay, so let me get this straight. So you had someone from the CIA show up to your office, and he had a list of people who had medical problems,
mm-hmm.
and some of those medical problems were a consequence of people coming into contact with what technology that is mysterious? Is that the right way of thinking about it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they didn't know what the source of it is, but now we know that it was basically, I mean, it's an energy weapon, just a microwave weapon. Just imagine you could focus the beam of your microwave in a very narrow path towards a person's head. You'll bake the brain cells in their head. So, I mean, there's nothing magical about it. We have them. Everybody knows that these things exist. At the time when we were working on it, we were calling it interference syndrome. You call something a syndrome when you don't know the exact 15, because I was just talking about this, just saying, isn't this an interesting idea? You're going to ruin your career, Garry. And I was just like, but the data's on the table. It isn't ridiculous to ask the question. But the fact that they were trying to push it off the table incensed me. It was just like, that's not how a scientist thinks. That is just and I said to him, I said, you sound more like a priest than a scientist. Maybe you should give your PhD back. There's, unfortunately I've got stuff I can't show you, but it's like, we have an object that's within 200 feet of the helicopter. What do you say when it's sitting right there in front of you? We have a picture from the ground. Interestingly, from the ground, we could see it, but from the air, the guys in the helicopter couldn't see it, but it was right there. It wasn't like a mile away.
And were you there? Were you there?
I was not there for that event. Oh. I was there for a prior event where we had, basically a flyover or something that somebody on the roof saw very close up. We had a high motion or high frame rate camera where we saw something come one way and go back the other, and it looked like a silver sphere. And we calculated it as moving anywhere from 2,000 to 10,000 miles per hour, given the angle of what we were looking at and the speed, number of frames that we caught it in. So there's nothing that I know of. So there's either two ball bearings going at that, speed, within, a foot of the camera, or it was an object, like half a mile away, moving at the speeds I just related. It's data. So you asked before, what are the many things it could be? So the simplest explanation is it's something that's been here a long time that came here from somewhere else. Go look up where most of the UAPs are actually seen. They're seen around our nuclear aircraft carriers, and they're seen around our nuclear facilities. Why? Because maybe that's the one thing we can do that might hurt them in some way. And if we're about to break out into the local galactic arm, and we're a bunch of angry monkeys, maybe they want to basically keep an eye on what the angry monkeys are up to lately and what they can and can't do.
Are those areas more surveyed?
Perfect question.
I mean,
yes. Yes. So maybe it's a observer bias. But because they're more observed, with credible camera systems, right, and with credible observers, then it's more, then it's more credible. Here's an interesting thing that happened. But, you don't even have to wait for me. Just look at what this guy, Tim Phillips, has been saying publicly, and what even Sean Kirkpatrick, the former head of AARO, has said. Is that, yes, he's the one who talked about the Mosul orb. We're seeing these things all over the planet.
And the orbs, is that a standard sighting?
Yes, it's relative. Well, I mean, it's relatively frequently reported by the military as well as by individuals, the public. But I don't have less faith in it. But it's so much more easily discredited, and these days, especially with AI. But here's an interesting one. Because there's no reason why 1 billion years ago, somewhere in our galaxy, an intelligent race developed, an intelligent civilization. If one did, it could have, just by mere simple propulsion of 10,000 to 50,000 miles an hour, have spread over the entire galaxy. Now, again, it's not something.
Well, was it Watson or Crick who proposed an extraterrestrial origin for DNA because he couldn't understand how it could have possibly evolved? I don't remember which of the two co-discoverers of DNA it was, but.
Well, there's two interesting papers that came out. One was looking at the half-life of DNA complexity as a Moore's law equivalence. So Moore's law. Right.
I saw that paper. Yeah.
Rockets, signatures of planes. There's a lot of other information that's being collected, but it's being dumped in the garbage immediately. So we pushed to say, maybe there are capabilities of some of our, near level adversaries that we need to pay attention to, like hypersonic rockets from Putin. So let's open the filters. And guess what they found? The first thing they found were the Chinese balloons. So the Chinese had found a loophole in our sensor systems. But because we in the UAP community said, you need to open your sensors, maybe something's missing, the first thing they find were those Chinese balloons. And they closed the loophole.
Sure, and I want to talk about your Sol Foundation as well, and also the fact that you've analyzed materials with unusual properties. So if we can tangle all that together, that would be good.
Yeah. So the reason why we started the Sol Foundation, and it was me, Peter Skafish, and David Grush. David Grush was the gentleman who testified in front of Congress about what he claims were the reverse engineering programs. And the principal reason for starting the Sol Foundation was to enable, let's say, a picket fence within which people of reasonable intelligence or academics, but could have a conversation and not be laughed out of the room. To be able to say, here's a hypothesis, and here's the data I have. Do you think my hypothesis matches, or do you have another idea? But the spectrum of things about which we wanted to be able to talk about were everything from religion all the way through to material science on my side. So we have Peter Skafish, who's an anthropologist and what is the other one? Let's call him an anthropologist. And so he's interested in people's stories, right? What are so-called experiencers? What's the pattern of the experiencers? And what kind of, let's say, trauma might they undergo? Not only because of the experience itself, but the trauma of not being able to talk to your friends and or family about what it is that you think that you saw because of the stigmas associated with talking about this and not wanting. I've done enough for humanity with the technologies that I've developed for patients and whatever. So in my spare time, if you will, this is something that none of my colleagues are interested in, or at least fewer previously than they are today. It's hard to give the 5-minute elevator pitch about this in any forum without pointing you at, probably a dozen books that help set the mindset. And Jacques came to this conclusion in one of his books in Passport to Magonia and others, where he kept on using this word absurd. It's absurd that a UFO lands in a farmer's field and a little guy in a silver suit gets out, tinkers with the thing, and then gets back in and flies off. It's absurd. If anybody says there's no evidence, they haven't taken even 5 minutes to look at it. And I tell my colleagues, don't tell me there's no evidence if you haven't spent at least a day looking into the evidence. If you want me to give you the books, I'll tell you which ones to start with. And if you can refute 5 of the stories in those books, then I'll stop.
You mentioned a couple of books. Do you want to just name a couple of them that people could delve into?
Well, I mean, I would read Jacques Vallée's Passport to Magonia, which will give you a very wide view of what what's going on. Another is by Robert Powell, and it's basically, I can't remember the exact title, but military. I'll have to give you the name. I'll just scramble it.
There's UFOs and Government,
yes.
A historical inquiry?
Yes, that's it.
UFOs and Government, a historical inquiry. Okay.
Is what motivates me here. It's that dual drive of being told it's not something I should be asking, and then the opportunity that I see, for,
well, Dr. Nolan, that's probably a good place to, that's a good conclusion. That's a good landing place, I would say. And that's a good place to start. Any closing words, sir?
Think of this as an intelligence test and hope that you pass.
All right. Thank you very much for talking to me today.
Okay.
Much appreciated. Very good to meet you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you very much.